It is about 4 in the morning, that time where your mind feels ready to sleep but your eyes are still wide awake. You look out into the darkness outside your window, and there it is, the full moon illuminating the night with its soft glow. The sight of it immediately brings back that childhood memory of staying up past your bedtime to watch it rise over the horizon. Back then, it was accompanied by the fear of what monsters might be lurking in the shadows while you snuck out to see it. Now it's just you, the moon and the stars in a comfortable silence. This moment is so peaceful. You feel completely alone, yet strangely connected to everyone else who's taken the time to stop and appreciate the moon at this very same hour. Even back then, the sight of the moon rising had something about it that felt profoundly moving, an inexplicable sense of wonder that fills you with curiosity about all the secrets the universe holds. What is it about the moon that has captivated humans for thousands of years? Why does seeing it in the sky fill us with such a deep sense of awe and wonder? It's been described as a universal experience, one that's touched the hearts of people from all walks of life. But what is it about this celestial body that has the power to evoke such strong emotions in us? In this video, we want to explore some of the reasons why the rising moon evokes such a profound sense of wonder in our hearts, from its ability to symbolize new beginnings to its role in shaping human history. Join us on this journey to discover the many ways in which the moon has captured our imagination and why seeing it rise never fails to leave us in awe. But before we begin, if you enjoy videos like this, slow, soothing, and quietly filled with wonder, I'd love it if you gave this one a gentle like and maybe tapped subscribe. It helps more curious minds like you find their way to this peaceful little corner of the internet. The moon is the only natural satellite of the Earth and the 5th largest in the solar system. Its diameter is about 1/4 that of the Earth, and it orbits our planet every 27 days, completing one full rotation in the same amount of time. The moon plays an important role in stabilizing Earth's climate and tides, and has been a source of fascination for humans for thousands of years. Ancient civilizations often worshipped the moon as a deity, and its phases were used to predict agricultural cycles and plan religious ceremonies. In many cultures, the full moon is associated with magic and mystery, and is said to be a time when the veil between the physical and spiritual realms is thinnest. The moon has inspired countless works of art, literature, and music throughout history, and continues to be a popular subject for photographers and stargazers today. Whether you see the moon as a scientific marvel or a spiritual symbol, there's no denying that it's a truly fascinating celestial body that has captured the human imagination for centuries. And when we see the moon rising, it's hard not to be filled with a sense of wonder and appreciation for the beauty of the natural world. There's something deeply comforting about the moon, isn't it? Perhaps it's because we've known its rhythms for so long. We know that after the darkness of night comes the light of day, and then the gentle return of the moon. This predictability creates a sense of calm and familiarity that's soothing to our souls. It reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there is always light to be found, and as the moon rises higher in the sky, we feel a sense of hope that tomorrow will be better than today. The moon is a constant in our ever-changing lives, a friendly face that greets us every evening and bids us good night as it sets. It's also possible that our fascination with the moon stems from its ability to trigger our sense of wonder and curiosity. As we watch it change shape in the sky, we're reminded of our smallness in the grand scheme of things, and it sparks our imagination. What else is out there beyond our planet? Are there other worlds with their own moons and stars? These questions have fascinated humanity for centuries and have inspired countless works of art, literature, and music. The moon has a way of transporting us to another place, a place where anything is possible and our imagination is the only limit. When we see the moon, we're reminded of the infinite possibilities that exist in the universe, and we're inspired to dream big and reach for the stars. Many cultures have their own mythology and folklore surrounding the moon. In Greek mythology, the moon was associated with the goddess Artemis and was said to be a representation of her ever-changing moods. In Chinese culture, the moon is an important symbol in art and poetry, and is often associated with themes of love and loss. These stories and legends have been passed down through generations and have shaped our understanding of the moon and its place in the cosmos. They remind us that the moon is more than just a celestial body. It's a symbol of the human experience, of our joys and sorrows, our hopes and dreams. The moon also has a profound impact on our planet and its inhabitants. The gravitational pull of the moon is responsible for the tides of the ocean and has a significant impact on marine life. It also plays a role in stabilizing Earth's climate and axis tilt, which makes it possible for life to thrive. When we see the moon in the sky, we're reminded of our connection to the natural world and the forces that shape our planet. It's a reminder that we're not just observers of nature, but active participants in the delicate balance of life on Earth. For some, the moon represents new beginnings and fresh starts. The lunar cycle, which begins with the new moon and ends with the full moon, is often seen as a metaphor for the cycles of life. Just as the moon waxes and wanes, we too go through periods of growth and decline. But just as the moon eventually returns to its full glory, we too can emerge from our dark nights of the soul stronger and wiser than before. The moon is a symbol of hope, that no matter how challenging things may seem, there is always light at the end of the tunnel. In times of darkness and uncertainty, the moon serves as a beacon of hope. When everything around us seems to be in chaos, the moon is a constant in the sky, a steady presence that reminds us that things will eventually get better. The soft glow of the moon on a dark night can be a source of comfort and solace, a reminder that we're not alone in the universe. It's a silent witness to our struggles and a symbol of the beauty that can be found even in the darkest of times. The moon also has the power to bring people together. There's something inexplicably romantic about the moon, especially its ability to make everything seem more beautiful than it already is. A walk under the moonlight can be an incredibly special experience, whether you're with your partner, friends, or family. The moon is a natural mood setter that creates an atmosphere of intimacy and wonder. And when we share these experiences with others, we create lasting memories that we'll cherish for years to come. When was the last time you took a moment to appreciate the moon? Did you stop to marvel at its beauty, or did you let another night go by without giving it a second thought? The moon is there for us every night, silently watching over us as we go about our daily lives. It's easy to take it for granted, especially if you live in a city where light pollution makes it difficult to see. But if you make an effort to look up and appreciate the moon, you'll be rewarded with a sense of wonder and awe that never gets old. So next time you see the moon, take a moment to appreciate its beauty. Let its gentle glow remind you of the magic that exists in the world. Let it inspire you to dream big and reach for the stars. And let it serve as a reminder that you're part of something bigger than yourself, connected to the natural world and the rhythms of the universe. As we come to the end of this video, we invite you to share your thoughts and experiences with us. What does the moon mean to you? What memories do you have of watching it rise? And how has it impacted your life in big or small ways? Your stories and insights might resonate with others who have similar feelings towards the moon, creating a sense of community and shared wonder. If you found this video soothing and insightful, don't forget to give it a gentle like and maybe tap subscribe. It helps more curious minds like you discover this peaceful little corner of the internet filled with slow, soothing, and curiously calming videos. Thank you for joining us on this journey to explore the wonders of the moon and the sense of peace and wonder it brings us. Until next time, keep looking up at the stars and never stop questioning the mysteries of the universe. It is night in an unfamiliar forest. The air is heavy with moisture, and the tall trees are covered in strange, delicate fronds that rustle in the gentle breeze. Their leaves, like those of ferns, are composed of many leaflets that spread out from a central stalk. These plants tower over the swampy ground where strange creatures stir. A beetle-like animal scuttles through the underbrush, its 6 legs carrying it away from danger. But what is that danger? Perhaps it is one of these lumbering, bulky monsters that looks like a giant lizard, but has too many legs to be one. Or maybe it's something even more terrifying, like a carnivorous plant with huge snapping jaws and razor-sharp teeth. What if I told you that this world actually existed? And not just a world like this, but a world exactly like this. Welcome to Life on the Carboniferous. The name Carboniferous comes from two Latin words, carbo, meaning coal, and ferre, meaning to bear. During the Carboniferous, coal swamps were so widespread that today they make up the majority of our coal reserves. But this isn't your average coal. Unlike the low-quality sub-bituminous coal found in places like Montana, the coal of the Carboniferous is high-quality bituminous coal. The reason for this is simple: the source material. Most of the world's coal comes from dead plants that grew and died in shallow, warm waters, allowing them to decay without fully breaking down. In order for plant matter to become coal, the remains must be buried quickly, preventing decay by oxygen and soil bacteria. If you've ever dug up a piece of coal and noticed that it has a shiny surface, now you know why. This is a thin layer of carbon that has been oxidized or burnt off the coal over millions of years. But because the Carboniferous swamps were deep, the plant debris that fell into them never made it to the bottom. Instead, the water's oxygen-depleted state prevented the formation of humus, which creates modern soil. Without oxygen, the plants instead decayed completely into a thick black sludge called peat. When the water levels eventually fell, this peat was deposited into layers, creating some of the largest accumulations of coal ever seen. But how did these vast swamps form? Well, the Carboniferous was one of Earth's warmest periods and rainfall was abundant. These conditions, combined with high levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, created the perfect environment for plants to flourish. But these plants weren't like today's plants. They were part of a group of plants known as lycopods, which have been around since the Silurian period. Lycopods include today's club mosses and spike mosses, but during the Carboniferous there were also many giant lycopods. One of the most famous is Lepidodendron, which reached heights of over 35 meters. But even taller than this were the tree ferns, which dominated the swamp's understory. Some species grew to over 40 meters tall, making them the tallest plants in the world. It wasn't just the plants that grew to gigantic proportions. Fungi were also significantly larger during the Carboniferous. Armillaria, a genus of honey mushrooms, had massive underground colonies spanning hundreds of square kilometers. And in some cases, they're estimated to have been thousands of years old. But life in the Carboniferous wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. For example, there were plenty of scary animals, like this millipede. Okay, maybe it's not that scary, but it sure is big. Millipedes are known for their rounded bodies and 2 pairs of legs per body segment, unlike centipedes, which have only 1 pair. Millipedes don't bite, but they can secrete a toxic liquid when threatened. So I would keep my distance just in case. But this creature may have been even more impressive. Amphisbaena was a type of lobe-finned fish that lived in the swamp's shallow waters. Lobe-finned fishes are the ancestors of tetrapods, which include all 4-footed vertebrates like us. So it's likely that Amphisbaena spent some time on land. Its head resembled that of a crocodile, while its long, slender body had dozens of small fins along its length. While the exact lifestyle of Amphisbaena is unknown, it's possible that it was an ambush predator, using its fins to crawl up on land in search of prey. But Amphisbaena had competition. There was another amphibian in the Carboniferous swamps that didn't look too different. This was Ichthyostega, the first known tetrapod. Unlike Amphisbaena, Ichthyostega was better adapted for life on land thanks to its 8 strong limbs. It's thought that these limbs evolved from fleshy, fin-like appendages used for walking across land. Ichthyostega means fish roof, referring to its fish-like mouth and roof-like skull. So far, fossils of Ichthyostega have only been found in Greenland, but other tetrapods were found throughout the world. One of them was Acanthostega, whose genus name means bony roof. As its name suggests, this creature's skull was bony, but it also had 7 pairs of ribs extending from its backbone. Whether these ribs were connected to limbs is uncertain, but some paleontologists believe that they once were. Like Ichthyostega, Acanthostega had 8 limbs, but it also had more primitive features such as a lack of an upper jaw. This suggests that Acanthostega was an earlier tetrapod than Ichthyostega, possibly belonging to a transitional group between fish and tetrapods. But these weren't the only animals hunting on land. There was also this monster, a giant amphibian with a massive head, bulging eyes, and jaws full of sharp teeth. It was named Prehistoric after Prinos, the Greek titan who devoured his children. And it's easy to see why. The skull of Prehistoric was incredibly broad and flat, similar to a modern platypus, and was armed with 2 pairs of temporal openings. These holes allowed for powerful jaw muscles, giving Prehistoric a massive bite force. But what did this creature eat? Well, you can probably guess just by looking at its teeth. They were perfectly suited for catching and crushing fish, but it likely ate just about anything it could catch. This included smaller amphibians like the ones I mentioned earlier, as well as insects and other arthropods. But Prehistoric wasn't the only large amphibian in the Carboniferous. There was also a much more bizarre one named Archaeops. Archaeops looked like a cross between a crocodile and a frog, which makes sense considering that it was closely related to both. Its body was short and stout, with a flat head and no external ears. Its eyes were also strange, lacking eyelids and having a reflective layer known as tapetum lucidum. This helps nocturnal animals see in the dark by reflecting light back through the retina, making it more sensitive to light. You're probably familiar with this if you've ever shown a flashlight in a cat's eyes. Another weird feature of Archaeops was its teeth. Unlike most amphibians, which lose their teeth as adults, the teeth of Archaeops continued to grow throughout its life. In fact, its teeth were so large that they often fell out and were replaced by new teeth, just like sharks. The strange appearance of Archaeops has led to it being nicknamed the ugliest animal that ever lived. But it wasn't ugly in the eyes of every scientist. Some have argued that it was a very handsome beast. While these amphibians ruled the land, another giant monster was ruling the skies. It was one of the largest flying animals to ever exist, with a wingspan of over 30 meters. To put that into perspective, it was larger than a giraffe. It was named Titanoptera after the Greek Titan who personified the force of expansion, and its size fits this description perfectly. But despite its size, Titanoptera was an insect. In fact, it belonged to a group of insects known as orthopterans, which includes grasshoppers, crickets, and katydids. But like all insects, Titanoptera had a chitinous exoskeleton and 6 legs. So how did such a large animal avoid collapsing under its own weight? Well, it helped that most of Titanoptera's weight was located in its abdomen, which is also where most of its musculature was. This allowed it to balance itself on its 6 legs while in flight. But even with this adaptation, it's unlikely that Titanoptera could have supported its own weight on land. Because of this, it likely spent most of its time in the air, perhaps feeding on flying reptiles and early birds. But even Titanoptera had nothing on this creature. It was the largest animal to ever live, weighing as much as 120 tons. That's heavier than 10 African bush elephants. This monster was named Brontosaurus, meaning thunder lizard. It was a sauropod, closely related to Diplodocus and Argentinosaurus. But what did it eat? Well, the answer is simple. Like most sauropods, Brontosaurus was a herbivore, using its long neck to reach high plants that no other herbivore could reach. But while sauropods are usually depicted as gentle giants, some scientists think differently. They believe that sauropods were actually aggressive animals that competed fiercely with each other for food. This is based on their large size and strong tails, which could easily deliver a killing blow. Maybe it was these aggressive tendencies that allowed these giants to thrive. Or maybe it was simply because they were perfectly adapted to their environment. Whatever the reason, these giants were successful, living all across the world until their extinction at the end of the Carboniferous. Thank you for watching. What is your favorite part of the Carboniferous? Please leave a comment below, and as always, thanks for watching. See ya. Welcome back, old friend. It's me, your old pal, here with another episode of Science and Mystery for when you want to keep your eyes open, but your brain turned way down. And today, we are talking about those times when what seems like a dream turns out to be reality. Like that time you ate an entire pizza and woke up with an empty box in your hands and a fleeting sense of shame. Did you really do that? Do you even remember doing that? Well, science says you most likely did because dreams don't have a physiological basis. In other words, dreaming is something that happens to your brain while you're awake and asleep. But what if you were dreaming about something scary and you didn't even know it? Join us today as we look into situations where people had nightmares so realistic they started acting on them without even realizing it was all in their heads. First, we have to ask ourselves, how does a nightmare work? What happens in your brain when you're having one? Nightmares are an unpleasant part of REM sleep, which stands for rapid eye movement. And this might sound obvious, but we have to start there. If you've ever been rudely awakened by someone who dared to touch your face during a dream, you may have noticed your heart was racing and you were sweating. You probably felt shaken and disoriented for a minute too, maybe even frightened. That's because your body reacts to your dreams, just not always in the way you'd expect. When you're experiencing a nightmare, your brain is physically recreating what you're seeing, hearing, and feeling in your dreams, often triggering visceral responses in your body. And this means increased blood flow to your muscles, faster heartbeat, and faster breathing. So, what happens if you're having a nightmare but you don't wake up? Well, this is where things get a little more complicated. There isn't enough scientific evidence to say exactly what happens to your body if you go from sleeping to conscious in the middle of a nightmare. But we can make some educated guesses based on what we know about the brain and sleep. The first thing to consider is sleep inertia. This is that feeling of grogginess you experience when you wake up, and although it's normal to feel this way, it can last anywhere from a few seconds to several minutes. Sleep inertia is caused by your brain attempting to transition from the depths of slumber to full consciousness. During this period, your thinking can become fuzzy, making it difficult to focus on tasks or make decisions. Additionally, your motor skills can suffer. Reaction times slow down and you might even feel physically clumsy, kind of like when you're drunk, except without the loss of balance and definitely without the hangover. So let's say that you're having a nightmare. Your body is reacting with a racing pulse and shallow breathing. Then your brain perceives that danger and attempts to jolt you awake. But your mind is still half asleep, and instead of screaming, "Get off," to a partner trying to cuddle you awake, you might accidentally text a random number that starts with the same 3 digits as yours. Or maybe you sit straight up in bed and knock over a lamp. You could even try to run away from a threat that isn't actually there, only to find yourself knee-deep in kitchen drawers or face down in the laundry basket. These scenarios are possible, but perhaps even more likely is the idea that your brain would simply trick you into waking up before you acted on your nightmare. After all, a nightmare is just a dream, and your brain knows the difference between the two. But sometimes this line between dream and reality can get blurred. One example of this was seen in a case study published in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine. The patient was a 26-year-old man who began compulsively checking his home's locks every night before he could fall asleep. This behavior left him exhausted during the day and made it hard to function. When asked about it, he said he felt compelled to check the locks because he kept having a recurring nightmare where his house was being robbed. He would check the locks and windows, make sure everything was fine, and then go to sleep only to repeat the whole process the next night. This continued until he visited a doctor and was diagnosed with a condition called nightmare disorder. Nightmare disorder is a sleep disorder that causes people to have frequent nightmares. It can cause distress and interfere with sleep, leading to feelings of exhaustion and irritability during the day. But what happened to this man was also a perfect example of somniloquy, which is the technical term for sleepwalking. He wasn't literally sleepwalking since he was awake enough to drive to work and interact with his colleagues, but he was also not fully awake during his lock-checking expeditions. He was stuck somewhere between dreaming and reality. Now, the treatment of choice for this particular case was cognitive behavioral therapy, which is aimed at reducing anxiety and treating underlying mental health issues such as PTSD. In this man's case, he managed to stop his compulsive checking after working with a therapist to address the root of his fear. But he wasn't the only one. In another case, a woman was waking up screaming in the middle of the night, startling her husband. She had no memory of doing so. Her husband, being the champ that he is, spent months wondering if she was having seizures. Finally, she was diagnosed with a nightmare disorder. Although she had no recollection of the event, her nightly screams indicated that she was having vivid, scary nightmares. Once these were treated, the nighttime screams stopped. However, not all nightmare disorders are this straightforward. For instance, sleepwalking and talking are considered parasomnias, which are behaviors that occur during sleep. Research suggests that both are linked to a malfunction in the same part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex. This area is responsible for decision-making, rational thought, and social behavior. So when it stops working properly, well, you might end up running around the neighborhood in nothing but your socks or using the blender as a microphone. But other sleep disorders are more closely related to mental health conditions. For example, post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD can lead to frequent nightmares. People with PTSD often re-experience the trauma they endured through nightmares and flashbacks. Similarly, restless leg syndrome has been linked to iron deficiency. While this isn't fully understood, scientists believe that low iron levels can affect the neurotransmitter dopamine, leading to uncomfortable sensations in the legs and an irresistible urge to move them. This can disturb sleep and lead to restless nights. It's important to note that these connections between sleep disorders and other conditions are complex and not fully understood. More research is needed to determine the underlying mechanisms and risk factors involved. All of these cases point to a larger question. What happens to your body if you never wake up from a nightmare? Is it possible to sleepwalk or somniloquy your way through an entire night of terror? Some experts say that you wouldn't be able to do that because your brain would wake you up before you hurt yourself or anyone else. Others say that if your nightmares are severe enough, you might just black out until morning. We don't have all the answers, but one thing is certain: we'd better find out. Imagine a world where nightmares aren't just terrifying experiences in our dreams, but can actually cause physical harm in the real world. That's why it's crucial to understand the link between our dreams and our physical reality. By exploring these connections, not only do we gain insight into the fascinating workings of our brains, but we also learn how to protect ourselves and others from potential harm. As we continue to unravel the mysteries of our minds, we uncover a deeper understanding of what it means to be human. So keep dreaming, keep exploring, and let's wake up together in a world that's a little less scary, one sleepy yawn at a time. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to leave us a like and a comment telling us what you'd like to hear next. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss an upload. Thank you for joining me today, old friend. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you soon. The Earth is a dangerous place. Even today, if you step outside without paying attention, you can easily find yourself in trouble. If you don't watch your step, you may fall into an open manhole. If you don't pay attention to traffic, you might get mowed down by a speeding car. But that's nothing compared to what it was like 230 million years ago. Back then, the Earth looked much different than it does today. And if you were unfortunate enough to get outside, you would quickly realize that you were in serious danger. In today's video, we'll dive into that time period, the only time in Earth's history when the greatest hunters lurked not in the oceans, but on dry land. So, hold on to your seats and prepare for a journey back in time to when the Earth was ruled by monsters. Welcome to my channel. The reign of the dinosaurs is often thought of as the golden age of monsters, and for good reason. Dinosaurs are just so iconic. From the smallest hummingbird-sized relatives of Ankylosaurus to the mighty Tyrannosaurus rex, they rule our imagination like no other animals. However, the dinosaurs weren't the first large animals to dominate the Earth. In fact, they wouldn't appear for another 40 million years after the greatest monsters of all had already come and gone. The term dinosaur means terrible lizard, and although their reign lasted for over 160 million years, it was short compared to the reign of the monsters that came before them, the temnospondyls. These were a group of large amphibians that dominated the Earth long before the first dinosaurs hatched. They were masters of both water and land, possessing many of the advantages of both. On land, they were massive and strong with stout legs perfect for chasing down prey. In the water, they had flattened tails that acted like paddles and could swim with ease. The largest of these monsters reached lengths of up to 8 meters and weighed about 1.5 tons. That's bigger than almost any crocodile alive today, and some scientists think they were even larger. But these giant toads weren't stupid. Just like their modern descendants, crocodiles, they used their superior brainpower to hunt down prey both on land and in water. Their eyes protruded from their sockets, giving them excellent vision on land. And they also possessed the ability to regulate the amount of salt in their bodies, allowing them to thrive in both freshwater and saltwater. This versatility made them the apex predators of their time. There isn't a single animal group that can claim to have been this effective both in water and on land. Now you might wonder why they're not around anymore. After all, if they were so successful, why did they disappear? Well, here's where things get interesting. Despite being incredibly adaptable, they went extinct, but not for reasons you might expect. We tend to blame climate change on the extinction of most prehistoric species, and you'd be right. It played a major role. But in the case of temnospondyls, it wasn't the changing climate that got them. It was us. Yes, humans played a part in the demise of these monsters. Okay, technically, it wasn't us humans specifically, but our fishy ancestors did. The fish were getting smarter, and some of them crawled out of the water and onto land. They were clumsy at first, but eventually they became better than their amphibian cousins. Eventually, the apex predators became prey. The temnospondyls couldn't compete with the new threat, and they began to decline. Their reign of nearly 70 million years came to an end, opening the door for new life to flourish. It seemed like nature had finally found a balance, but what came next was beyond anyone's wildest imaginations. The timing couldn't have been worse. The temnospondyls were going extinct right when conditions on Earth changed drastically. Suddenly, huge parts of the world became drier and the seas receded dramatically. The climate grew drier and hotter. Large parts of the world became deserts and global temperatures rose more than 10 degrees. You could fry an egg on a beach and you wouldn't need sunscreen. You would think that such extreme conditions would allow the survivors to thrive, but that wasn't the case. Most of the animals and plants couldn't handle such drastic changes, and they went extinct. Only the most resilient creatures survived. Yet somehow they couldn't repopulate the Earth fast enough. For hundreds of millions of years, the Earth was mostly lifeless. The whole planet was stuck in a kind of twilight zone. This period, known as the Great Dying, coincided with the Permian mass extinction event, the largest in Earth's history. About 90% of marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates went extinct. Life barely clung on, and humanity didn't exist yet. So who knows what would have happened if this event had occurred when we were around? Maybe we would have become an extinct footnote in a moment of ecological chaos. However, there were some survivors, including a small group of lobe-finned fish. These are the ancestors of tetrapods, four-footed vertebrates like us. They were somewhat similar to modern lungfish, but smaller and more eel-like. Yet these humble beginnings belie a remarkable evolutionary leap. For as these fish eked out an existence in the shallow waters, they faced challenges that drove evolution into overdrive. They needed to adapt to gulp air directly from the atmosphere since the water had little oxygen. As they struggled to survive, they developed limbs to support themselves on land. Some believe they resembled modern-day mudskippers, amphibious fish that hang out on land. But these early tetrapods were more adept at walking, and soon they took their adventures further. They left the water in search of better habitats, seeking refuge from the harsh environment. Their quest led them into caves, a refuge from the scorching sun and howling winds. Deep within the caves, they discovered a world untouched by the chaos above. Here, life persisted in its quieter forms. With few predators, these cave dwellers flourished, evolving into giant salamander-like creatures, some reaching lengths of up to 9 meters. They swam effortlessly through the water, propelled by their powerful tails and sturdy fins. Their lives were peaceful, protected from the dangers that plagued their relatives who ventured out into the open waters. These giants thrived in the darkness, feeding on smaller creatures that inhabited the caves. Life for them was idyllic until one fateful day when the cave's entrance collapsed, plunging them into eternal darkness. Without the ability to see or navigate in the pitch-black environment, they perished. Those that managed to escape the collapsing cave, well, they weren't built for life on the surface. Their eyes were too big for the bright sunlight, rendering them blind. Meanwhile, on the surface, things were changing rapidly. Plants were evolving that could withstand the sun's intensity, and the small fish from before were now becoming giants, giving rise to the first sharks. Not only that, but life was returning to the oceans and evolving in ways that nobody expected. As the seas teemed with new life, a different kind of monster was emerging. Sharks had appeared, but they weren't like the sharks of today. These sharks were huge, like nothing alive today. Imagine a shark the size of a school bus. Yeah, those existed. This was also when rays came into existence, and they grew to immense sizes, too. In fact, these giants were the largest cartilaginous fish ever. One of these rays could easily reach wingspans of over 20 meters, dwarfing today's largest living ray, which is a bit less than half that size. Such giants required a huge amount of food, and they changed the ocean forever. Now, as these monsters roamed the seas, something strange was happening on land. A group of tetrapods was making their way across the dry land. They were on a mission to colonize the world, and they started building the foundations of their empire by laying eggs. Their offspring would hatch and grow up in burrows, safe from the harsh conditions above. Once they emerged, they would spend their days looking for food. They were scavengers, feasting on whatever they could find. And as they scurried along, they hunted small arthropods, unwittingly playing a crucial role in the ecosystem. They were essentially the janitors of the prehistoric world. As they cleaned up dead and decaying stuff, they helped pave the way for new life to flourish. And that life would be unlike anything that had ever existed before, because the stage was set for the rise of the dinosaurs. These reptiles were perfectly adapted to the hot and dry climate. And suddenly, they took over the Earth. Within a few million years, they were everywhere, ruling the land and filling every ecological niche. The reign of the dinosaurs had begun. Strangely enough, as terrifying as the oceans could be, your odds of survival were far greater there than on land. Tonight, we've drifted slowly into that alien world where fear and fascination walk hand in hand, into the only time in Earth's history when land was ruled by creatures worse than dinosaurs. But it's not just fascinating to imagine what it would be like to live in such a scary time. It's also important to remember that the Earth has seen a lot of changes over its 4.5 billion-year history. It's comforting to know that no matter how bad things get today, the Earth will likely take care of itself. And who knows, maybe in a few million years, it will be our turn to rule once again. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. We appreciate your support. Imagine a world where spiders could wrap their giant hairy bodies around your torso, where cockroaches had pincers like crabs, and where you can't even see the ground because there are too many gigantic dragonflies blocking your vision. This is the terrifying reality of today's prehistoric monsters, where all of the insects are absolutely enormous. And I mean enormous. These insects are so big that they can hunt down and devour real-life animals such as small rodents or even snakes. They would literally make an adult human look like a peanut. If you thought that these creatures only existed in movies, then get ready for an unpleasant surprise because they used to live right here on our planet. But what happened to them? Did they simply go extinct, or did something else happen? Let's find out in today's episode of Paleologic, the insect apocalypse. The first creature we have to take a look at is one of the scariest monsters that has ever lived. With its countless legs, black, oily body, and huge pincers, it looks straight out of hell. But in reality, it was only an insect. Meet the Titan beetle. This monster is actually related to modern-day cockroaches, but don't be fooled by its name because it's definitely not some small beetle that you can easily kill. It's massive, reaching lengths of 16.7 inches. That means that this insect was longer than some species of dinosaurs, like the same length as Ankylosaurus, which had plates of armor all over its body. It's no wonder that if you saw this thing crawling towards you, you would probably faint dead away. But the scariest part about the Titan beetle is that it wasn't just a lumbering chump. It was incredibly fast, being able to run up trees twice as tall as itself. In fact, there is evidence that suggests that this beetle would jump up trees, ambushing its prey before they could even realize what was happening. These beetles lived during the early Permian period, around 300 million years ago, and they lived in what is now South America. But how did they go extinct? One theory is that it was because of a mass extinction event called the Capitan, which killed off 90% of all marine species and 70% of terrestrial vertebrates. It's possible that the Titans were simply wiped out along with all of the other creatures that couldn't adapt to the changing environment. However, another theory is that the Titan beetle went extinct because of something else entirely. According to paleontologists, this insect was too big to exist. Basically, the researchers looked at the exoskeleton of the Titan beetle and realized that it wasn't strong enough to support its own body weight. So it's possible that this monster didn't go extinct, but instead, it never really existed. If that's true, it means that we might still have something even more terrifying to fear. Moving on, let's talk about a real insect monster that did exist. The Gigantodon. This insect was a type of bristleworm, related to modern-day sandhoppers, and it lived during the Carboniferous period, which lasted from around 359 to 299 million years ago. This insect was truly a monster, growing to lengths of almost 19 inches. But unlike the Titan beetle, the Gigantodon didn't have hard armor protecting its body. Instead, it had tough bristles made of chitin. These bristles acted as armor, protecting the Gigantodon from being eaten by predators while also helping it to move on land. In fact, the bristles on this monster were so strong that they could support its entire body weight. So, unlike the Titan beetle, the giant toad definitely did exist. But why did it go extinct? One theory is that the oxygen levels were higher during the Carboniferous period, which allowed for giant insects to evolve. However, as the Earth began to cool down, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere decreased, which made it difficult for these giant insects to survive. So it's possible that the giant toad went extinct because it was simply too big to survive in a world with lower oxygen levels. Now, I know what you must be thinking. Why hasn't this happened to modern-day insects? Well, it's because we live in an icehouse world, meaning that most of the water on the planet is frozen. Because of this, the amount of oxygen in the atmosphere isn't low enough to affect modern-day insects. But if global warming continues at its current rate, who knows what kind of monsters might start appearing. Speaking of giant insects that roamed the Earth during the Carboniferous period, let's now take a look at Meganiostoptera. No, that's not a new type of Pokemon, but rather one of the largest insects that has ever lived. This insect had a body like a scorpion, a head like a cockroach, and wings like a dragonfly. It could grow to a total length of 24 inches, making it longer than the average human foot. This insect lived during the late Carboniferous period, around 300 million years ago, and it was one of the top predators in its ecosystem. However, there's very little fossil evidence of Megan Eurocoptera, so we don't know much about its anatomy or behavior. Basically, we only have a few fragments of its wings and legs, so it's possible that this insect was even bigger than we think. If that's true, it means that this thing could have hunted down and eaten anything it wanted, including dinosaurs. But of course, it didn't go extinct because it was too good at hunting. In fact, its fossils have only been found in a single coal mine in France, which suggests that it went extinct because of a sudden environmental change. For example, a volcano may have erupted nearby, releasing toxic gases that killed off all of the Meganeustoptera. Whatever happened, it led to the extinction of this insect and many others. Moving on, let's now take a look at one of the scariest predators that has ever lived. The giant bird eater. As its name suggests, this arachnid could grow to lengths of 8.2 feet, with its body alone being around 6.5 feet long. That's longer than the average polar bear, which is one of the largest land predators that currently exists. But the giant bird eater wasn't just big, it was also vicious. It lived during the Permian period, around 260 million years ago, and it was a type of trigonotarbid. These creatures are known for their large bodies and their ability to eat birds, hence their name. But the giant bird eater was so big that it could eat anything it wanted, including other giant insects and small animals. In fact, there is evidence that suggests that this spider would ambush its prey before wrapping its giant legs around their bodies and sucking out their insides. Just the thought of that makes me sick to my stomach. But the question is, how did this spider go extinct? Well, one theory is that it was because of competition. As the Earth began to warm up, new types of insects evolved that were better adapted to the changing climate. For example, the first ants and bees appeared during the Permian period, and they competed with the giant bird eaters for food. It's possible that this competition led to the extinction of this spider and many others. However, another theory is that the giant bird eater went extinct because of something else entirely. According to paleontologists, this spider had a weak exoskeleton, which made it vulnerable to attacks from other predators. For example, a group of smaller spiders may have worked together to take down a giant bird eater. However, it's important to note that there is no fossil evidence to support this theory. So it's possible that the giant bird eater simply went extinct because of a sudden environmental change, like a volcanic eruption or an asteroid impact. Finally, let's take a look at one of the most terrifying insects that has ever lived. With its huge jaws and enormous wings, this creature looks like something straight out of a horror movie. But in reality, it's only an insect. Meet the griffin fly. This insect was related to modern-day dragonflies, and it lived during the Eocene epoch, around 56 million years ago. It was one of the largest insects that ever flew, with a wingspan of 19 inches. That's wider than a bald eagle, which is one of the largest birds of prey in North America. But the griffin fly wasn't just big, it was also vicious. It could fly at speeds of up to 60 miles per hour, and it had huge jaws that it used to capture and eat its prey. In fact, the griffin fly was so deadly that it's believed that it was one of the top predators in its ecosystem. However, like all of the other giant insects on this list, the griffin fly eventually went extinct. But why? Well, one theory is that it was because of changes in climate. As the Eocene epoch came to a close, the Earth began to cool down, which led to the extinction of many plant and animal species. The griffin fly was one of these species, and it's possible that it simply couldn't adapt to the changing climate. But regardless of how it went extinct, one thing is for sure: we don't want to find one of these things crawling on us. Thank you for watching. What do you think? Do you think these giant insects will ever come back? Or maybe you have some other explanation for their extinction. Either way, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment down below. And if you liked this video, be sure to subscribe for more prehistoric insect videos. Thanks for watching. It was a forgotten world. The Earth had recently seen the largest mass extinction in history. An asteroid impact had destabilized the climate and wiped out most of the planet's species. But life always finds a way, and somehow it managed to bounce back. But this is where things get weird. You see, during this time, our planet's atmosphere carried nearly 35% oxygen compared to the 21% we breathe today. That single difference was enough to give rise to a land crawling with monsters. Creatures so enormous, so strange that even our imagination struggles to keep up. So grab a blanket, a pillow, and your favorite stuffed animal because we are about to take a trip back to the prehistoric past. And these are the terrifying animals that would make you go extinct if they were alive today. Arthropleura. The best way to deal with a harsh environment is to grow big. After all, size does matter. It helps protect you from predators and allows you to roam new territories. Just look at arthropods. During the Carboniferous period, it experienced one of its greatest radiations, producing many large and bizarre forms. Take Arthropleura, for example. This many-legged monster belonged to a group of insects known as the order Arachnida. The first fossils of this creature were discovered in 1842 in Scotland, and it was estimated to be around 2.6 meters long. But that was just a conservative estimate because since then, more complete specimens have been found. In fact, the longest specimen was over 4 meters. But what's scary about Arthropleura is that it lived in Europe, which means that there might have been even bigger specimens that we don't know about yet. If it were alive today, it could easily crush you without even trying. Spina titan. Another strategy some creatures took to survive was to adapt to their surroundings. Some changed their diet while others developed thicker armor. For instance, the spiny titan was a herbivorous sauropod that grew a row of bony plates along its neck and back. They may have been used for protection, or maybe the dinosaur used them to attract mates. We don't really know. But what we do know is that the spines got longer and larger in later species, suggesting that they played an important role. The species that lived in the north of Patagonia was called Spinatitan saltitank, and based on the size of its femur, it reached a maximum height of 7 meters and a length of 20 meters, and since it was a sauropod, it weighed almost 10 tons. Imagine one of these things trampling you as you walk through the streets of New York City. Don't think you can hide either, because Spinatitan's eyesight was excellent. According to a study published in 2020, their eyes were located on top of their heads, which gave them a panoramic view of their surroundings. So, better run away. Paleoparadoxia. Here's another creature that seems like it came straight out of Jurassic Park. This is Paleoparadoxia. And no, it's not a relative of Ankylosaurus, it's actually a type of placoderm. These were a diverse group of fish that dominated the oceans during the Devonian period. They had thick armor made of bony plates and were equipped with powerful jaws. Paleoparadoxia was the largest of them all, reaching a length of 9 meters. But don't be fooled by its intimidating appearance because it was a peaceful fish. Its diet consisted mainly of plankton, which it filtered using its gill rakers. The only problem is that its huge size made it rather clumsy. It couldn't turn very well, so it probably dragged itself along the sea floor. But luckily for us, these giants went extinct 359 million years ago. Gigantopithecus. Speaking of size, this primate takes the cake. At least it would if it were alive today. Gigantopithecus was an incredibly large ape that lived in China and India. It had a gorilla-like body with a human-like face and weighed around 500 kilograms. Fossils of this beast date back 100,000 years, but some researchers argue that it might have survived until the 19th century. This claim is based on the fact that Gigantopithecus is very similar to the modern-day orangutan, and orangutans have been recorded to live up to 50 years in the wild. However, evidence suggests that the species went extinct due to climate change. It began to rain less in the region, which resulted in the formation of dry land and the emergence of grasslands. Orangutans preferred to live in forests, so they migrated elsewhere while the Gigantotherium stuck around and eventually died out. But if it had hung on a little longer, it might have been us who went extinct instead. Deinonychia. When you think of dangerous sea creatures, sharks are probably the first thing that comes to mind. But sharks weren't always the apex predators they are today. In fact, the title of the ocean's most feared hunter once belonged to Deinonychia. It was a type of ichthyosaur, a group of marine reptiles that resembled dolphins. Deinonychia had a massive skull with conical teeth, perfect for crushing bones. They also had paddle-shaped limbs and a vertical tail for efficient swimming. What made Deinonychia truly unique was its eyes. They were enormous, reaching 28 centimeters in diameter. This suggests that they were perfectly adapted for hunting prey in the darkest depths of the ocean. Plus, they could have easily spotted you from miles away. Their reign of terror lasted from the Triassic period until the end of the Cretaceous. But then, suddenly, they disappeared. Scientists believe that increased competition with other predators, such as sharks and mosasaurs, led to their demise. Meganeura. Insects aren't just small creatures that fly around your house. Back in the day, they were terrifying beasts that ruled the skies. During the Carboniferous period, one insect stood out among the rest, Meganeuro. As the name suggests, it had giant wings that spanned over 33 centimeters. To put that into perspective, those are almost the same as mine. But Meganeuro was much scarier than I am. With its large size and fierce appearance, it must have been quite a sight to behold. But unfortunately, it also went extinct during the Great Dying. Scientists believe that the sudden increase in oxygen levels caused widespread fires, which eliminated much of the insect habitat and food sources. Most insects were unable to adapt to the changing environment, but birds evolved and continued to thrive. Pulmonoscorpius. Now let's turn our attention to land. Even though dinosaurs were the kings and queens of the earth, they weren't the only ones. There were also gigantic scorpions that roamed the planet. One of them was Pulmonoscorpius, which means lung scorpion. Despite its fearsome appearance, Pulmonoscorpius wasn't related to modern scorpions. In fact, it was part of a group of arachnids called trigonotarbids. They were mostly medium-sized, but Pulmonoscorpius was an exception. It had a body length of up to 32 centimeters and a leg span of 1 meter. The creature's name comes from the fact that it had book lungs, a structure used for breathing in air. This adaptation allowed it to live on land, unlike most other arthropods of its time. But sadly, this didn't help it survive the mass extinction event. But if it had lived longer, it would have made a great guard dog. After all, recent studies suggest that scorpions evolved from early vertebrates, mastodons. Even though the Pleistocene epoch was dominated by humans, it was also home to some pretty amazing creatures. One of them was the mastodon. It was closely related to the woolly mammoth, but had smaller, more rounded ears and longer, more curved tusks. Mastodons were herbivores and spent their days looking for food. They traveled in herds led by a dominant male and females with their young. But they faced constant danger from predators like dire wolves and saber-toothed cats. Humans also hunted mastodons for their meat and hides, but it was the changing climate that ultimately led to their extinction around 10,000 years ago. But if they were still around today, they would definitely become endangered by humans. Smilodon. Humans have a long history of hunting big cats. In fact, cave paintings from over 15,000 years ago depict scenes of humans and lions fighting each other. But the most famous prehistoric cat is Smilodon, aka the saber-toothed cat. This creature was a skilled hunter that ambushed its prey and used its long fangs to deliver a fatal blow. Its fur was short and sleek, perfect for chasing prey through tall grass, and its claws were sharp and retractable, allowing it to stalk its victims undetected. The saber-toothed cat lived in both North and South America until around 11,000 years ago, when it mysteriously went extinct. Some scientists believe that climate change played a role, while others blame humans. And now it's time to hear from you. Which of these extinct creatures would you bring back to life? Let us know in the comments below. Also, don't forget to like and share this video if you enjoyed it. But for now, it's time to say goodbye. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. It is 48 million years ago. The world is warm, maybe too warm, but it's hard to tell because there are no terms for hot and cold yet. And this world has its own sounds, ones that you won't recognize. It smells different, too. There's no word for that either. So just try to imagine what it would be like if all the words in your vocabulary didn't exist. Try to imagine what it would be like if every sound that you knew suddenly meant something else. Imagine what it would be like if you were dropped off alone into a strange, unfamiliar place without any of the words to describe it. Without the ability to communicate with anyone around you, would you survive? The Eocene epoch lasted from about 56 to 34 million years ago and is considered part of the Cenozoic era, also known as the Age of Mammals. This was a time when mammals really started to diversify and evolve. This was also a time when primates started to emerge. But all we have to go on today are fossils, so we're working with what we got. So now, take a deep breath. Close your eyes. Let your shoulders soften, and together, let's step softly into the only time in Earth's history when water was safer than land. Okay, so it's warm. What do? Probably sweat. That's not a good idea here. If you were to sweat right now, you would be slowly killing yourself. See, back then, the ozone layer was basically non-existent. What that means is that the sun's ultraviolet radiation was basically just dumped directly onto the Earth. Back then, the UV index was at a solid 10. Today, the highest ever recorded was 18. The skin cancer rate was probably pretty low, though, because humans hadn't evolved yet. We don't know what other animals were doing to protect themselves from the sun. But if you wanted to survive back then, you had to cover up. Maybe you find some leaves or make a shelter or find a cave to chill in, just so long as you weren't outside. You look around and notice something. All the trees have broad leaves. Where are the conifers? They're still around, but they're rare. Broadleaves were better for the warm climate, and they thrived. This is also a great time for early primates who were starting to diverge from other mammals. See, primates have specializations for living in trees, things like grasping hands and big brains. But there aren't any predators around yet. The ancestors of cats, dogs, and bears are still evolving. For now, you're safe among the trees. You can live out the rest of your life swinging from vine to vine, never touching the ground. Then, one day you get thirsty. How do you get water? Hopefully there's a stream nearby because rivers and oceans aren't an option. The water is full of monsters. See, back then, the oceans were full of megalodon. These massive sharks grew to over 70 feet long and weighed more than 10 tons. If that doesn't scare you, maybe this will. Ah, the helicoprion. What's scary about this shark, you ask? Well, we don't know exactly what it looked like because we've never found a skull. The only evidence we have are these weird spiral-shaped teeth. Okay, what about this guy? Looks like a whale, but it isn't. It's a monstrosity that evolved to fill the ecological vacancy left by the mosasaurs after they went extinct. It ate everything, including each other. Oh, and watch out for these guys, too. They look cute, but they're actually ancient. Their ancestors were some of the first vertebrates, and they haven't changed much since. If you were somehow able to avoid all of these aquatic monsters, you might be rewarded with a drink of fresh water. But wait, what's in that water? Something you definitely don't want to ingest. Lead. See, by this time, the continents had drifted apart and new tectonic plates were forming. Volcanoes were erupting everywhere and spewing massive amounts of CO2 into the atmosphere. The extra CO2 reacted with the ocean and made it more acidic. The acidity was so high that it leached lead from rocks and put it into the water supply. This led to a mass extinction of marine life. But it wasn't all bad. After all, this event allowed for modern whales and dolphins to take over the oceans. But for you, it's not so great. There's no clean water anywhere. You could die of dehydration pretty quickly here, but you struggle on. Your body is changing. You're evolving to adapt to this new environment. You might not have been able to talk before, but now you can. Not only that, but your descendants will eventually invent written language. One day, you and your descendants will look back on this time and name it the Eocene. After all, you named pretty much everything else, and the oceans, they'll seem like a distant memory, not because you forgot about them, but because they're gone. Wait, what happened? Sea levels fell 350 feet during the late Eocene. Some studies suggest that it may have been due to a sudden burst of mountain building. Others say it was caused by a massive ice sheet forming in Antarctica. Whatever the reason, huge swaths of land were exposed, connecting the Americas and creating new land in the Mediterranean. What does this mean for you? Well, you're screwed again. It's dry and there's nowhere to hide. You wander around lifeless deserts until you trip over a dead animal. Aha, food. But then you notice something different. The bones are bigger than anything you've seen before. Maybe it's a relative of the gorilla or an early ancestor of the bear. Either way, you need to eat, so you gnaw on the bones until a bird flies overhead. You've never seen a bird before, but you know that whatever that was, it wasn't friendly. You see, birds evolved feathers independently from dinosaurs. They used those feathers to attract mates, keep themselves warm at night, and fly through the sky. You hear another sound and you turn around. What is that thing? It looks kind of like a kangaroo, but it's not. It's a relative of the horse that lived on all fours. And they're not the only odd animal you see. There are also creatures that look like camels, tapirs, and even elephants. But those are just the small ones. Back then, there were also giant, flightless birds, saber-toothed cats, creepy dog things, and these guys, which honestly, we don't even know what they are. If you manage to survive all this, maybe you live long enough to see the end of the Eocene. The Eocene thermal maximum was the last major heat wave before the ice ages began. Temperatures reached 9 degrees Fahrenheit higher than today, which doesn't sound like that much until you realize that people living in places like Minnesota and North Dakota would be living in temperatures similar to Mexico City. And once again, you adapted. Now you grow fur to keep cool and seek shelter during the hottest times of the day. You and your descendants develop agriculture and build houses. Then one day, you and your descendants are sitting around a fire telling stories about the old days, how everything used to be warm and there were no ice cubes. Then someone asks, what came first, the chicken or the mammoth? And everyone just stares at each other awkwardly. No one knows because no one has invented language yet. But the good news is, you survived. And it wasn't just the air that was thick. Everything was thicker in the Carboniferous. The world was saturated with giant insects, gigantic millipedes as long as horses, and enough coal to keep all of humanity running for thousands of years. So what made this world so thick? And how did such bizarre creatures evolve? And why do we live in a world without giant millipedes? Hi, and welcome to Life Noggin. Today, we are going to talk about the Carboniferous period. And if you like learning about weird ancient worlds, then make sure to subscribe to our channel. But back to the Carboniferous. The Carboniferous lasted from about 359 to 299 million years ago and is part of what is known as the Paleozoic era. The Paleozoic is broken down into 6 periods, starting with the Cambrian, which is famous for its explosion of life. Then comes the Ordovician, which has its own mass extinction event. After that is the Silurian. Then it's the Devonian, also known as the Age of Fishes. Then we get to the Carboniferous, and after that we have the Permian, which ends the Paleozoic and has the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. And although the Carboniferous had its own mass extinction event at the end, it started off with an explosion of life like the Cambrian. This period gets its name from the Greek words for coal and stone, and there's a reason for that. During the Carboniferous, vast swamps formed around the equator, and when they died, they turned into massive coal deposits. These coal swamps were mostly made up of plants called lycopods. Now today's lycopods are tiny plants, but their Carboniferous ancestors could grow to be 30 meters tall. These giant lycopods grew in dense thickets that spread across the landscape. And, unlike today's plants, they had vascular tissue strengthened by lignin, a substance that we use to make paper and plastics today. These plants flourished thanks to a process that most of us learned about in high school biology: photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is how plants use sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water to create energy and release oxygen as a byproduct. And the Carboniferous saw a huge increase in the amount of photosynthesis happening on the planet. But it wasn't just the plants doing all the work. The plants of the Carboniferous had a symbiotic relationship with a group of fungi that helped them absorb nutrients and water. In exchange, the fungi got to eat the plant's carbohydrates. This relationship allowed plants to grow bigger than ever before. It also led to the formation of the first forests. All of these plants meant that Earth's oxygen levels were way higher during the Carboniferous than they are today. In fact, during this time, Earth had around 35% oxygen, compared to our measly 21%. What's crazy is that these high oxygen levels didn't cause any global warming. Scientists think that might be due to all of the CO2 being sucked out of the atmosphere by all the lush vegetation. So, higher oxygen and no global warming. Sounds like a great time to be alive, right? Well, not exactly. See, the super high oxygen levels caused something else too: fires. All of those plants that were growing thanks to the extra oxygen produced massive amounts of fuel too. And once a fire started, it could rage out of control. Fire scars found in ancient rock suggest that huge areas burned across the landscape, killing off much of the plant life. However, some scientists argue that the fires may have actually helped clear out underbrush and allow even more plants to grow, leading to even more oxygen and even more fires. So maybe it was a wash. As for who or what was living in all this plant life, well, there were definitely animals. We know that because we found fossils of a wide variety of creatures from this time period. One of the major animal groups that evolved during the Carboniferous were the first true reptiles. Before this, most vertebrates were still fish, or lived on land but had to go back into the water to reproduce. But the first reptiles were fully terrestrial, meaning that they could live and reproduce on land. They also had a new adaptation that helped them survive in dry environments: amniotic eggs. Amniotic eggs were a big evolutionary leap because they contained all the nutrients the developing embryo needed, and they also had a membrane that kept the embryo from drying out. These adaptations allowed reptiles to thrive in a wide variety of habitats and eventually gave rise to dinosaurs, turtles, snakes, and lizards. Another diverse group of animals that appeared during the Carboniferous were the first true insects. Before this time, insects were mostly small and not particularly numerous. But during the Carboniferous, giant insects took over the land. A partial fossil of one of these giant insects named Meganeura found in France is 39 centimeters long and had a wingspan of 42 centimeters. The biggest bug ever discovered, a 52-centimeter-long stick insect called Meganustoptera, also lived during this time. But what allowed these giants to evolve? Well, many scientists believe that it was the high oxygen levels that made it possible. Insects breathe through tubes called tracheae that run through their bodies. Oxygen enters the tracheae through holes along the sides of the insect's body called spiracles. Since the air was so thick with oxygen during the Carboniferous, the insects could afford to have smaller spiracles and therefore expend less energy keeping their bodies from drying out. They could also grow bigger without having to sacrifice mobility. Now, you might be thinking, wait a minute. Wouldn't those giant insects be a problem for the giant millipedes? And you're right. There's a lot of overlap between the two groups. In fact, until 1806, all millipedes and all insects were grouped together in a category called Myriapoda. Eventually, scientists realized that millipedes and insects were actually more different than they were alike. But they are still grouped together in a category called Chelicerata, along with spiders, horseshoe crabs, and others. So back to your original question, wouldn't those giant insects be a problem for the giant millipedes? The answer is yes and no. Millipedes and insects both molted, meaning that they shed their exoskeletons as they grew, and the two groups probably competed for resources while avoiding being eaten by predators. Having to molt was a serious drawback for millipedes. See, when a millipede molts, it has to wait for its new exoskeleton to harden, and during that time it's vulnerable to being eaten. So this means that millipedes couldn't grow very large because if they were slow about molting, they'd get eaten. Or if they grew too big and molted quickly, they'd break their new exoskeleton. Giant millipedes would be easy prey for giant predatory insects, not to mention other giant predators like temnospondyls. Temnospondyls were a diverse group of large, mostly aquatic tetrapods, which are four-legged vertebrates. Some were as long as 9 meters and had huge mouths full of sharp teeth. So it seems that the thick, oxygen-filled air of the Carboniferous allowed giant insects and temnospondyls to flourish, but it also created an environment where giant millipedes couldn't survive. Eventually, the high oxygen levels returned to normal, and with that, the age of giant insects came to an end. Their giant size made them more vulnerable to drying out, and in an age of lower oxygen levels, they simply weren't suited for life on land. As for the giant millipedes, they likely never reached huge sizes in the first place. But as the Carboniferous came to a close, the whole world changed. Around 299 million years ago, there was a mass extinction. Although scientists aren't entirely sure what caused it, they think that it may have been linked to a volcanic eruption in what is now Siberia. If that's true, then the event may have been similar to the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia in 1815, which caused the year without a summer. After the eruption, winters were cold and summers were cool for several years afterwards. Crops failed and there was widespread famine. Whatever the cause, the end of the Carboniferous saw a mass extinction unlike anything that had happened before. It wiped out around 70% of all land and sea species, and it was a harbinger of what was to come at the end of the Paleozoic. 14 million years later, there would be another mass extinction that would wipe out around 90% of all species. That event is what ended the Paleozoic and ushered in the Mesozoic, or, as we more popularly refer to it, the Age of Dinosaurs. Click here to learn more about that time period, or click here to watch this video. As always, this has been Life Noggin. Don't forget to keep on thinking. What if I told you there's a place in our universe that's almost exactly like Earth, but where the gravity is 20 times greater? Well, you're in luck because such a place exists, and it's just a few light years away from us. Meet Proxima Centauri b, also known as Alpha Centauri bb, or simply Centauri. Proxima Centauri b is an exoplanet orbiting Proxima Centauri, the closest star to our own. It orbits around its star in the Alpha Centauri system, which is just 4,024 light-years away from Earth. The planet itself is roughly the size of Earth and has a mass at least 1.27 times larger than ours. This makes it one of the most exciting places in our cosmic backyard for scientists to study. Now, don't get too excited. We can't visit this world anytime soon, as even the fastest spacecraft would take over 80,000 years to reach it. However, recent scientific analysis suggests that this super-Earth could be habitable, meaning it might have oceans, an atmosphere, and, most importantly, life. In order to determine whether or not the planet could support life, researchers use mathematical models to understand how atmospheres on planets evolve over time. The team concluded that if Centauri did indeed have an ocean, then it would still exist today. On the flip side, if the planet didn't have an ocean, it likely never could have formed one. Why? Because the atmosphere would have either been blown away by the strong stellar winds from its star, or the water would have frozen solid. This means that this planet has a good chance of having an ocean, but only if it's around 40% bigger than Earth. If the planet were any smaller than this, then the atmospheric pressure would have been too low to prevent the water from freezing. But if the planet were any larger, Then the pressure would be too high and the water would boil. So it looks like we found the Goldilocks zone when it comes to the perfect conditions for liquid water to exist. And, unlike our Earth, Centauri receives twice as much radiation from its star. But that may not be a bad thing. See, our Sun is kind of boring. At 436 billion years old, it's a run-of-the-mill yellow dwarf star. Meanwhile, Proxima Centauri is a red dwarf with a whopping 8.4 billion years under its belt. Red dwarfs are about half the size of our Sun, and they burn through their hydrogen fuel very slowly. Stars like these tend to outlive their larger siblings by billions of years. Our universe is estimated to be around 13.7 billion years old. And according to some, the heat death of our universe will occur when our Sun turns into a red giant. Someday, our Sun will swallow up the inner planets, including Earth, so maybe we should start looking for a new home. In fact, Proxima Centauri will likely outlive our entire planetary system. But enough about our boring yellow dwarf. Let's get back to its big brother, the red dwarf. Red dwarfs emit much less light than other stars, making them harder to detect. Also, since they're so small, it's hard for them to shake off their initial momentum, and they don't travel very fast. That means that they usually don't travel very far from where they formed, unlike the Sun, which slingshotted through space after a near-death experience with a rogue star. Because of this, astronomers believe that all of the planets in the Alpha Centauri system formed within 10 light years of where they are today. Basically, the Alpha Centauri system is like one of those neighborhoods where everyone's house looks the same and nothing ever changes. All right, now let's say we were actually able to pack up and move to this exciting new planet. What would we find if we stepped outside? Probably a lot of fog. When scientists first discovered Proxima Centauri b in 2016, they thought it was a true Earth analog, a twin planet orbiting its star at roughly the same distance our Earth orbits the Sun. But further analysis revealed that it's 8 times closer to its star. And while Earth receives a comfortable 100 units of light, Centauri receives a whopping 400. Scientists think the extra light may come from reflecting off clouds in the planet's sky, kind of like how the sky over Earth's Arctic Circle can glow blue during the summer. But on Centauri, the sky itself might have seemed sharper, the light filtering through thick clouds and mist, casting an eerie brightness that would feel unnatural to us. It was not the same Earth we know, but a version of the planet that seemed designed to test the limits of life. So what else would we see in the sky? At first glance, it would look pretty normal, just like a typical night on Earth. We'd see the same familiar constellations like Orion, the Hunter, or the Big Dipper. And that's because the majority of stars in the night sky are incredibly distant, meaning they appear as fixed points of light no matter where you are in the galaxy. However, we would notice one major difference: the absence of our beautiful Milky Way band. From our vantage point on Earth, we can see a flat band of stars stretching across the sky. This is our galaxy, the Milky Way, viewed from the inside. But if we were on Centauri, we wouldn't be able to see the full glory of the galaxy. All we'd see is the individual stars that lie along our path of view. That would leave us feeling rather insignificant, staring up at a smattering of stars while the rest of the galaxy remains hidden. It might be hard to see the galaxy, but we'd be able to see something else: Alpha Centauri. Unlike our Sun, which appears as just another star in the sky, Centauri would be blazing bright, dominating our night sky. We'd probably need to squint to look at it. In fact, Proxima Centauri would be the brightest object in the sky, followed by Alpha Centauri A and B. If we brought a telescope, we'd be able to spot these two stars splitting into a double-star system. Together, they form a binary pair that orbit each other every 800 days. They're tightly locked into a cosmic dance with both stars visible from almost anywhere on the planet. But wait, isn't this a little confusing? How can Centauri have a star that's 400 times brighter than our Sun and be just 4.24 light-years away, yet we can't see it from Earth? You see, despite being our closest stellar neighbor, Proxima Centauri is actually quite dim, 400 times dimmer than our Sun. While Centauri A and B are truly bright, they're about as bright as our Sun. However, because the binary pair is a mere 11.2 light-years away, they appear bright enough to compete with the Moon and the Pleiades star cluster. Proxima Centauri, though, is just barely visible to the naked eye under ideal conditions. To make matters more complicated, Proxima Centauri b doesn't orbit the brightest star in the system, but the dimmest. As a result, it would be impossible to tell just by looking at the sky which star is our host star. If we were to walk outside onto the surface of Centauri, it would feel strangely familiar, yet subtly different. The landscape would seem similar to Earth, but there would be a pervasive sense that something was slightly off. Our eyes would struggle to adjust to the brightness of the world, trying to make sense of the muted colors and soft contours. Imagine walking along a beach, feeling the sand beneath your feet and hearing the gentle roar of the waves crashing into shore. Yet, when you turn to look at the source of the sound, you see nothing but a hazy, featureless expanse of water. That is because the wavelets generated by the ocean are 20 times stronger on Centauri than they are on Earth. These powerful waves would carve deep canyons into the planet's surface, shaping dramatic coastlines that change shape every hour. As you venture further inland, the landscape becomes even more alien. Tall, jagged mountains pierce the sky, their peaks shrouded in mist. The air grows thick and heavy, making every step feel like an uphill battle. Here, gravity would be 20 times greater than Earth's gravity. This force would compress our bodies, making us about 20% shorter. You might have seen pictures of people on the Moon where their bodies appear oddly bent and distorted. That's because the Moon's gravity is about 1/6 of Earth's gravity. On Centauri, the opposite would happen. Gravity would pull our bodies down, flattening our faces and shortening our spines. Even breathing would become a challenge as the dense atmosphere makes each inhale feel like taking in a huge gulp of air. As the sun begins its slow descent, the sky takes on an eerie glow. The clouds, thick and heavy with moisture, reflect the dim light of the distant sun. The twilight hours stretch on, casting long, distorted shadows across the landscape. And as darkness finally falls, the familiar constellations of Earth's night sky emerge, offering a faint glimmer of familiarity in an otherwise alien world. It's a humbling experience, realizing just how tiny we are in the grand scheme of the universe. Staring up at the stars, we're reminded of the countless worlds out there beyond our own, each with its own unique beauty and wonder. So, what do you think? Would you visit Centauri even if you knew what you were getting yourself into? Or would you stick to Earth where the gravity is more familiar and the skies aren't quite so haunting? Either way, it's clear that the universe never ceases to amaze. Who knows? Maybe someday we'll have the technology to explore these distant worlds and discover the incredible wonders that await us there. But, until then, we'll just have to settle for gazing at the stars and dreaming of what might be out there. What do you do when your spaceship loses power? If you're the crew of the International Space Station, you play charades while you wait for someone to fix the problem. When NASA lost power to the space station back in 2011, the astronauts aboard had to figure out a way to pass the time until power was restored. The solution: act out the name of a movie or a book character, then have the others guess what you're acting out. One astronaut mimed being an astronaut floating in space, which apparently took a lot of effort because he ended up acting like he was having a seizure. Another person pretended to be Han Solo, frozen in carbonite. A third acted out Dumbledore from Harry Potter. And the fourth person on the station just pantomimed the word stuck. Fun times? But what would you do if your ship lost power? Would you try to fix it, or would you get with your shipmates and perform a dramatic reading of Hamlet? We thought you might want to know what your options actually are. So we made this video. If your starship loses power, you should probably first check whether anyone else has noticed and ask them what they think you should do. But if it's just you, and your ship is spiraling dangerously off course, you need to take action fast. So here are 5 things you can do when your spaceship loses power, starting with the most obvious one. Number 1. Restart the reactor. Power outages happen all the time back on Earth. And just like rolling blackouts at home, sometimes the best solution is to turn off the breaker and then turn it back on again. Space shuttles are powered by nuclear reactors that produce both electricity and heat for the spacecraft and its occupants. When the reactor goes down, that's bad news for everyone on board, so restarting it should be at the top of your to-do list. Of course, if turning the power back on puts you in danger, like if your ship's cooling system isn't working or there's some other sign of trouble, you shouldn't do it. Otherwise, the reboot could make a small problem into a big one. That means you need to troubleshoot first. Check the temperature, the radiation levels, and any warning signs before flipping that switch. If the coast is clear, go ahead and try to restart the reactor. In 2003, the Space Shuttle's auxiliary power unit lost power shortly after takeoff. This unit generates electricity and hydraulic power for various systems on the shuttle, and it couldn't be turned back on once it went down. With the path to re-entry in jeopardy, the astronauts tried everything they could to get it going again. They ran diagnostic tests, cycled through different electrical power settings, and even moved parts around manually to try to mimic what the unit would normally do. But nothing worked, so they had no choice but to end the mission early and make an emergency landing in California. It's a good thing they were close to home because the crew never did figure out what caused the outage. So if you can't restart your spaceship's reactor, what should you do next? No. 2. Get in touch with ground control. In an emergency situation, don't be afraid to reach out for help. After all, someone on the ground may have already identified the issue and figured out a solution that you have not thought of yet. There's a reason why NASA employs thousands of people to work on their missions, not just a handful of plucky astronauts. If the Space Shuttle's onboard computer detects a problem with any of the vehicle's systems, it sends a signal to the ground station tracking the shuttle's flight. From there, engineers and technicians work together to identify the issue and come up with a solution. Then, they send instructions back to the shuttle to help the astronauts resolve the problem. In 1991, an electrical power problem on the Space Shuttle caused the main engine to shut down during takeoff. This meant that the shuttle wasn't gaining altitude, and they risked slamming right back into the ocean. Ground controllers quickly figured out that there was a faulty connection between the main engine and the hydraulic system. So they sent the crew instructions to disconnect the two systems, which allowed the backup engines to take over. As soon as the engines kicked in, the astronauts were able to restart the main engine and complete the launch. So maybe your first move should be to grab your helmet and try to fix the problem yourself. Number 3. Get to work on a jury-rigged fix. Obviously, you should only attempt this if you have some mechanical aptitude and you know your ship pretty well. If you have those skills, you may be able to cobble together a temporary fix that buys you enough time for either ground control to figure out a long-term solution or your ship's reactor to cycle back on. The Apollo 13 mission is famous for the explosion of one of the oxygen tanks in the service module, which incapacitated much of the ship and forced the crew to abandon their moon landing plans. But the crew didn't just sit around and wait for rescue. They used what they had on hand to build a new carbon dioxide scrubber to replace the one that was destroyed in the explosion. They fashioned a new hose out of duct tape and an ice cream carton, and managed to jury-rig the various components together so that the astronauts could breathe easily. This gave NASA time to work out the details of getting the astronauts home safely. So even though the mission hadn't gone as planned, these resourceful MacGyvers saved themselves. Of course, if your ship's power goes out while docked at a space station, you won't have to worry about life support or anything like that. But you still won't be able to leave unless you get power back to your ship. So fixing the problem where you are might be the better option. Number 4. See if you can fix the problem locally. If you're close to a space station, your best bet might be to drop in and see if they can help you out. Sometimes a bit of teamwork makes the dream work. Back in 2017, a power failure on board the Tiangong-1 Space Lab caused an antenna to stop working. 2 taikonauts were sent to fix the problem, and they quickly got to work trying to figure out where the problem lay. After running a few diagnostics, they found that the part in charge of sending and receiving signals was working fine. So they started checking other components. Eventually, they traced the problem to a circuit board that controlled the antenna's orientation. Once they swapped out the faulty part, the antenna started working again, and the 2 taikonauts were free to return to their own ship. Of course, this only works if you're close to another ship or space station. But if you're not, you might want to try one more thing. Number 5. Try to land manually. Even if your ship loses power, many modern spacecraft are designed to allow manual control under certain circumstances. This usually kicks in automatically when onboard computers detect a problem. So if you find yourself in this situation, just try to keep calm and follow the on-screen prompts. If you're alone in your ship, you may have to take over piloting duties completely. But if you're in a crew, you can delegate tasks like maintaining altitude, adjusting the trajectory, and monitoring the instruments. After experiencing multiple delays, the Apollo 11 mission finally launched to the Moon in 1969. But shortly after takeoff, the flight computer overheated, and the crew knew they needed to land as soon as possible. So Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin prepped for a manual landing, but they weren't alone. Michael Collins was also essential to the crew's success. He maintained their altitude and kept them on course as Neil and Buzz focused on getting them down safely. And, thanks to Collins' piloting, the lunar module successfully touched down on the Moon's surface, and humanity took its first steps toward becoming an interplanetary species. Of course, you may not have a moon landing on the line like the Apollo 11 crew did, but you should still give manual landing a try. After all, you might just be able to pull it off. Losing power on a spaceship is a frightening prospect, but you can stay safe if you act quickly and decisively. So the next time you're watching Star Trek and the Enterprise loses power, see if you can figure out what you would do in that scenario. Then let us know in the comments. Also, if you'd be so kind, let me know in the comments where you are winding down from tonight and what time it is there. It's always a joy to see how far across the world this little sleepy corner of science travels. Thanks for watching.